11. They were back in the van, stuck in traffic downtown. They were patched into a group call with Bud, Echo, and Andre, their faces showing on the monitor and split screen. Bud was at what looked like the dining room at the Fort Fortuna Hotel and Casino. Behind him was a massive stone fire pit with various meats dangling over a roaring flame, buxom servers slicing off fresh hunks for tired-looking tourists. "Nobody knows squat," said Bud over a plate of charred sausages. "Tilly's body was found in the parking garage here, that was true. Looks like someone from Zoey's fan club then came and scooped it up before anyone from the city can get down here, like they'd been tipped off it was here or already knew. Fortuna staff didn't even follow up after that. Seemed like they were just relieved somebody took 'em off their hands. Either way, the carcass was here long enough for word to get out that it had been found at the largest and most well-known ash joint in the city, which I suppose was the point." Bud noticed his sausages were in the frame and said, "Oh, and while I was here, I decided to do some quality control on the buffet." Andre and Echo were calling from Andre's Bentley, also stuck in traffic. "We found Dexter Tilly's mother," said Andre, "but she did not want to talk to us. Showed her the old Ben Franklin subpoena, a whole stack of 'em. Didn't budge. Then we decided to track down Shayla Verne, but it looks like she's temporarily out of the country." "Looks like she knew this was all about to go down and wanted to get away," said Zoey. "That's weird, right? Okay, so who else is there to talk to?" "That's actually the problem," said Andre. "Ideally, we'd be able to talk to Tilly's friends, but if they're all part of the blowback, then they're definitely not going to talk to us." Echo said, "They're always in the hub." That was a popular VR hangout. "But I don't have an account, obviously. I'm much too cool for that." "Oh, God," groaned Zoey. "My ex used to have a part-time job in the hub, growing these power-up berries in a digital orchard that he'd sell for spoils. We'd be on a drive somewhere, and I could see him logged in with his glasses, harvesting his stupid berries. Who here has a login, so we can go in and talk to them?" "Not me," said Andre. "Why do I need a whole second life to make a mess of?" Will shook his head. What happened to Tilly didn't occur in the hub. It occurred in reality. Megaboss Alonzo said the confession bounty was put in up by a single donor, hinted that it was someone high up in private security. I assume he's talking about... "But that's not who killed Tilly," interrupted Zoey. "Maybe not," countered Will, "but it is who wants you to go down for it. That's who we're after, not the murderer. That could be anybody. Random street crime, for all we know." "No, I want to know who did it." "Somebody should comb through Blink," said Will, ignoring her. "See if Tilly had any dealings with..." An alert popped up on Will's phone. Zoey couldn't read it from where she was sitting, but she saw Will's forehead scrunch up. Another alert, this one on Woo's phone. Another, this one on the van's security system. She heard 3 more tones through their conference call. Andre, Echo, and Bud all getting the same notifications. Bud jumped up from his table. "Where are you guys? Right now." "Intersection of 31st Street and 36th Avenue, said Will. Note, the street naming system in Tabula Rasa made no sense whatsoever. Heading west. Bud was moving now, abandoning his food. "You need to get off if you can, or you're going to run smack into it." Zoey asked, "Run into what?" Will said, "There's going to be a riot at the Night Inn." Woo studied the display on the windshield. "We can turn off at the park. That would likely keep us clear." Zoey said, "No, take me there." Woo said, "That is an extremely bad idea. If these are Tilly's friends showing up at the inn, they're going after the girls, right? To get revenge? These are the girls we convinced to go back to work after the thing last month. Woo, go. Don't make me repeat the order." Traffic cleared as navigation systems collectively started routing other vehicles away from the disturbance. Zoe's disguised van rolled up to a spot about a block away from the Night Inn, close enough to see the front of the building had been repaired from the hostage crisis. In reality, that had probably been done weeks ago. And the entire front of the building was a looping video of an adorable girl's smiling face, big round cheeks and brown eyes, her fingers laced under her chin. Animated text scrolled around her face saying, "You're safe here." Subtle, thought Zoey. Also, the situation did not look like a riot. There were a few dozen people in front of the building, just kind of yelling at it. She couldn't quite make out what they were saying. Something about ponies? Zoey had expected burning cars and clouds of tear gas, but it was just a weirdly awkward gathering of idiots. None of them seemed to know what to do. It was actually kind of disappointing. "This is what everybody's freaking out over?" Will studied the scene. "We didn't say there was a riot. We said there was going to be one. A spontaneous riot, within the next 5 to 10 minutes. "It's a spontaneous riot, but they scheduled it in advance. That's thoughtful." From up front, Wu said, "It wasn't scheduled. There's an unrest algorithm that uses Blink to predict outbreaks of violence. So, it says there might be a riot." "No," said Will. "It's telling us that there will be one." And with that, a guy kicked over a trash can. Several people moved in to capture the damage on camera, getting the word out that chaos was occurring and that anyone who wanted to be famous should come join in, breaking the seal. "So, what do we do? How do we defuse it?" "You can't," said Will. "You have guards on the door and additional security on the way. If you step out there, they'll go nuts at the sight of you." "Does the software tell you that too? This is crazy." "It's not complicated. You have pre-existing moods, multiple ringleader personalities in proximity, and a triggering event that happened about 20 minutes ago. It's like a chemical reaction. At that point, we're just waiting for it to start bubbling up." "Triggering event? What was that?" "There's a new video from Dexter Tilly." "Tilly is dead," said Zoey, watching as the proto-riot overturned another trash can. "Unless someone's resurrected him again." "It was made 2 weeks ago, but it was just released while we were talking to Alonzo. Here." Will put the video on one of the van's monitors. It was a close-up of Tilly's teary, trembling, pimply face. He was sitting in what looked like a makeshift living space built out of a shipping container. Ribbed white metal walls, no visible window, an open case of self-heating ramen containers in the background. The young man took some pills, then took a drink from a bottle of water. He sniffed, let out a long breath, and then said, "They call it a teaser pony. On a horse ranch, it's hard to tell when the mares are in heat, but other horses can tell. So what they have is a male pony, a little one, maybe a Shetland, and what they'll do is lead the mares past him, and when he senses one is ready to breed, he'll get an erection and start thrashing around, desperate. Then they'll bring in a stallion to mount her. See, they pick a pony because he's physically too small to even do it. Even if he gets access to the mare, he can't mount her, and they know he's too small to hurt anyone when he finally lashes out. That's how he spends his life. Throbbing, desperate arousal, no relief. Rage and frustration, but powerless to get revenge. Too dumb to know he's just a tool, that others count on his pathetic neediness for their own profit. That's me, my whole life. I'm the teaser pony." Outside the van, a mobile vending machine that had been parked next to the entrance of the Night Inn raised itself up on tiny wheels and started rolling away, as if it was getting worried about the riot. Some of the kids saw it, surrounded it, and tipped it over, smashing the glass in front. Zoey felt oddly sorry for it. Bottles of soda and beer rolled out, and some of the burgeoning rioters grabbed them and chucked them at the facade of the building, hooting and yelling at the sound they made when they smashed. "So, first of all," continued Tilly on the screen, "I want to thank all my brothers out there who helped me find her. I tried to call, she blocked me. Tried to follow her on her Blink, she blocked me everywhere. Tried to find me at the inn. They said she was gone. Went to her mom's place. They had private security at the door, from the suits. Finally found out they had Shay holed up at a hotel out of town. And you guys, you heroes, you got me the room number. I know it wasn't easy, but she's got security there too, the cow funding this whole thing, and I know that I can fight through and get to the door if I want, tear down that door, tear down the building, but I don't do it. All I wanted was to say goodbye, to apologize, to make her understand." Tilly broke down in tears. "I chickened out, brothers. I let you all down. Didn't even approach the building. I know what her answer would be. I have all this love to give and nobody wants it, so I become everybody's puppet. I have this need, like an addiction, so they use it to control me. They smile, flash some thigh, touch me on the arm to get a bigger tip. You want this? You want this? Well, you can't have it. Giggling the whole time. So funny, isn't it? To watch me starve. Funny how I didn't hear laughter that day at the inn. Funny how only then, when she saw what I could do, understand what I could do to her, did she finally see me as a man. But even then, she had all the power. If she refused to go along, made me kill her, we all know how it would have played out. Headlines about another pretty girl murdered by an evil brute. A martyr. A symbol. But now, I understand. I can be that symbol. A symbol of a system that profits from our urges and then tries to shame us for having them. You did this, Shay. And for the rest of you, you know this isn't just about her. This is about a whole system. My brothers, it's time to burn it down. Outside the van, someone had found bricks. One was chucked up at the building's facade. It smashed into a second-floor window, through the thin video screen. Sparks flew. Static rippled through the animation of the smiling girl's face, making her eyes briefly look like she was having a seizure. The rioters went wild, excited that damage had been done. Another threshold had been crossed. Wu said, "They're here." Ash security vehicles pulled up on the sidewalk, teams in armored gear spilling out. Zoey spotted Kowalski among them. The rioters erupted at the sight, throwing bottles, then bricks. They seemed to have hit another gear, everyone moving with confidence now, feeding off of each other. Half of the security team tried to form a barrier in front of the door, while the rest went inside, presumably to evacuate the staff through the other exit. The screaming and chanting got louder, some spectators joining in until it wasn't clear where the riot stopped and the bystanders started. They, too, fed off of each other, the growing crowd bringing with it the cruel courage of anonymity. A bottle bounced off the van. The riot was spreading outward, engulfing them. The kid who threw it was just feet away, wearing a Halloween mask that projected a holographic skull, a design similar to the digital disguise Tilly had used the night of the hostage crisis. A security guard with a riot shield shoved him back, and the kid stumbled and bumped into the side of the van. His face landed right on the window, inches away from Zoe's. The mask slipped on impact, and Zoey looked right into his eyes. He couldn't see her. The windows were so tinted that it would have been easier to see through the metal door panels. But seeing the guy's facial expression, that was the first time Zoey truly understood. The trolls who occasionally show up to yell at her, they were always smiling or at least smirking. Common bullies having fun, members of a loose hate group who barely believed the slogans they scrawled on her buildings. What she saw in the face of this guy was something completely different. Rage, on a level that could only be called a kind of madness. She got the sense that if someone slid a big red button to that man and said, "If pressed, we'll destroy the entire planet," he'd have hammered it. All sense of consequence gone, a fury that blots out the future. Wu said, "Look!" He was leaning toward the windshield, pointing upward with a finger. A drone was buzzing in toward the building, way up at about roof level. Dangling below it was a big plastic drum hanging from makeshift straps. Zoey's first thought was that it was a bomb, but that couldn't be right. Things hadn't progressed to the bomb stage, had they? It would be much later when Zoey found out what was supposed to have happened here. The barrel was full of a white, hot liquid, a rubberized sealant somebody had stolen from a nearby construction site, the same place where they were finding the loose bricks. Their big, hilarious plan was to crash it into the building, spattering the white goo down the facade. See, so it would look like somebody had ejaculated all over the face of the girl in the video loop. They presumably didn't know that the material was highly flammable until it cured, or maybe they did know and didn't care. Either way, the drone and barrel crashed into the building as planned, splattering the goo down the screen and then into the sparking hole where the brick had gone through earlier. The liquid ignited immediately, a curtain of flame whipping upward. Zoey sucked in a breath. The crowd outside went wild. The kid outside threw a brick at the van's window, unintentionally hurling it right at Zoey's skull. The brick bounced off without leaving a scratch. They'd have gotten the same result if the brick had been a shotgun blast. This confused the kid, plus everyone who had saw it happen. They didn't put together the fact that this meant the van was in fact an armored vehicle in disguise. The riot hive mind is not a genius, but rather felt the dumb frustration of a dog that can't figure out how to open the toilet lid to get a drink. Several of the rioters ran over and started pushing on the van, rocking it, having decided that it'd be fun to tip it over. Wu didn't wait for an order from Zoey. He slammed on the accelerator, steered up onto the sidewalk, and drove right through the crowd. They hit one guy, hard, knocking him aside. Zoey felt it in her gut. They bounced down off the curb and got onto the street again, passing emergency vehicles whooshing in from the other direction. Professionals throwing themselves into danger on Zoey's behalf. She should be back there. This was her crisis. It should be her mess to clean up. And yet, they drove away, farther and farther from the danger, and Zoey said nothing. She reassured herself that ultimately she would pay the bill, that those emergency workers were doing their jobs, that everyone would understand. She hated herself. Will told Wu to stop somewhere. If they were being followed, he didn't want to lead them all the way back to the estate and give up the identity of the covered vehicle. They wound up in the parking lot of a company called Life Partners, a place that rents friends you can hang out with or who will help around the house. The building was designed so that it appeared the entire structure was being held aloft by a crowd of smiling statues, each one with a hand held above their head to bear the load, the other giving a thumbs up. Zoey watched from the feed from the inn. The fire had melted huge chunks of the facade, and the blaze had spread to the interior. Smoke was billowing out of several windows. Guards and employees were draining out of the building, fleeing the fire. She was struggling to breathe. Wu was asking her things, expressing concern. She couldn't really hear him. Will was watching her, saying nothing. She looked at him and tried to steady her voice. Is this my fault? Why are you asking that question? Why can't you just say no when I ask something like that? God! You're not a child, said Will gently. I won't treat you like one. You're asking me if this was your fault because you want to know what emotion you're supposed to be feeling right now. Are you supposed to be beating yourself up? Well, that's the wrong question. The world doesn't care about your emotions. So what question should I be asking? Whether or not you would do it differently next time. Everything that happens matters only in terms of what you can learn from it going forward. Are you going to lecture me about how I should have had Tilly killed? Would that have prevented this? I don't see how it would. Even if you'd make it look like an accident, like you said, they'd have found a way to blame me. Hell, for all we know, his death was an accident, and they're still blaming me. I agree. You do? Yes. You were right. I was wrong. My way would have made him a martyr, just a few weeks sooner. So, what in the hell am I supposed to learn from a bunch of people going nuts and torching my building? Some rioters in this world have a legitimate grievance. Do these? No. Are they rational in the demands they're making of you? I can't even tell what their demands are. So, we couldn't have done anything to prevent this. They're doing what they're already determined to do, for their own reasons. That means we move past self-doubt and don't look back. Now the only question that matters is how do we fix it? All right, how? Are they organized? It didn't look organized. It can be hard to tell from the outside sometimes. Chaos can be someone else's goal. Oh, wait, I just thought of a joke. Say the word organized again. Alonzo thinks a specific person is behind this. If so, we need to figure out what their goal is. Zoey stared at the feed from the inn. Ambulances were on the scene. Do you think everyone got out? Probably. Crews were already on the scene when the fire started. I don't have much hope for the building. I'm not saying it had no fire extinguishing systems. I'm sure it had something. But your father liked to invest in the parts of the building that boosted profits, and inspectors used to be very easy to bribe. He turned to Wu. Arrange to switch to another vehicle. Get us back to the estate. Zoey said, What? No, we're not done here. We haven't even solved our mystery. Will looked at her. Are you sure? This was not asked in the way that, say, your mother would ask if you're sure you don't want dessert. It was asked the way you'd ask a scrawny mover if he's sure your huge, expensive mirror isn't too heavy for him to carry alone. Don't ask me again. Will patched in the rest of the team again, the split screen taking over the main monitor. Everyone was in vehicles now, en route to somewhere. I want to know who's behind this, said Will, and I want to know in the next 5 minutes. Bud said, Well, we just did a bacon search on Blinka, every unscrupulous rich asshole in the city. A list that, by the way, is longer than an elephant's cocktail party anecdote, to see if anyone connected to one of them had ever interacted with Tilly. We got one hit, and it's what I think you were about to say earlier before we got interrupted. 2 weeks ago, Tilly was seen speaking to an employee of Titus Chaub. There was a silence across the call. Zoey said, The Titus Chaub? Bud said, Yes, ma'am. I'm just kidding. I have no idea who that is. Echo said, He owns the Vanguard of Peace, which is now the largest private security firm in the city and is rapidly becoming the only one. He's continuing to buy up all the smaller firms one by one. So he has a massive personal army. Great. Chaub travels with a jammer, said Bud. Any outgoing feed will get scrambled if the camera's within 100 feet of him. All we have is this shot. Bud put up a brief, looping clip of Dexter Tilly on the screen, looking sweaty and deranged, talking to a terrifying giant of a man. The giant had carefully mussed brown hair, blue eyes, and an elaborate asymmetrical beard. He was wearing armor that may or may not have been a Halloween costume. Zoey said, That's Titus Chaub? Why do the city's captains of industry aspire to be cartoon characters? Andre said, No, Chaub is the greasy dude sitting at the table with his son way back behind them there. The giant is Chaub's personal bodyguard, Dirk Vikernes. Will nodded. This is what Alonzo was hinting at. He's no fan of Chaub or the VOP in general. Zoey studied the giant muscled bodyguard and said, I suppose I have to go flirt with him, too. Will seemed to actually be thinking seriously about that. Bud, you can get me through to Chob, right? See if he'll meet me for lunch today. It'll just be you? Zoey said, No, I'm going. If this Chob character is trying to destroy my life, I want to look him in the eye. Will glanced at his watch. All right, if we take the slow, extra discreet route, that won't leave much time. After a beat, he said, We need to get organized. Otherwise, we'll end up like Tilly, said Zoey. Disorganized. Echo said, What do you need us to? Because he was missing his organs. What do you need us to do while you're up there? Get security to the other properties, said Will. Nothing else burns today. And get inside the hub, added Zoey. Actually, can we just buy the hub? It's a fake world. What can it cost? We'll buy it all up and shut it down. The trolls will hate that. Echo said, I'll, look into that. And what exactly do we need to be bringing to this meeting in the way of backup? This Chob guy has an army, right? He's just a businessman who happens to own a private security firm, said Will. He's ruthless, but he's not some kind of supervillain. All right, so where do we find him? He spends his time floating above the city in a huge black Zeppelin. 12. Will had not been joking about that. The big black blimp had once been a restaurant called Innere Schweinhund. The passenger hold famously only had room for 6 tables, plus a separate tiny bar, and then the kitchen. The chef, Van der Wolf, was a big deal. He had a popular blink stream that was mostly just a camera looking down at the counter while he plated dishes. The man was an artist and a psychopath, working magic in his kitchen and then raging at staff and customers alike. Getting a table at his floating restaurant used to mean 4 years on a waiting list. Or, if you were Titus Chob, you finally got frustrated with the wait and bought the restaurant, turning the dirigible into a company meeting space and Wolf into your personal chef. Also, the blimp was black in the way a blinding spotlight is white. The surface was made of a special light-absorbing nanotube material that reflected no features or contours whatsoever. From the ground, it was impossible to even grasp that it was a 3-dimensional object. It just looked like a perfect hole punched in the sky. You could routinely find tourists staring up at it and blinking their eyes, thinking there was something wrong with their vision. Zoey, Will, and Wu were told to board the restaurant from the rooftop of a building called Freya's Palace. Not one of Zoe's, she'd asked, and were informed that the blimp would then take a leisurely hour-long circuit around the perimeter of the city. The airship was already perched on the roof of the sculpted marble tower when they pulled up. The building was all curves and flourishes. Zoey wondered if a woman had designed it, and from the ground, the attached blimp made it look like it was wearing a black beret. Inside, she found that Freya's palace's interior seemed to be a gigantic spa complex for rich women, a silent space with customers shuffling around in white robes. They entered a glassed-in elevator that rose through a transparent tube surrounded by an aquarium, so that passengers could enjoy an annoying exotic fish as they ascended. Zoey put her hand into her jacket pocket and felt the tube of her mom's stupid skin cream. She pulled it out, the little animated flower dancing on the logo. Guaranteed to give you the confidence of a daisy? Still, she twisted out the petals and smeared it on her hands. Maybe it would stop them from shaking so much. The blimp docked directly to a glassed-in enclosure on the top floor. As they stepped from the elevator, the black shape loomed overhead, blotting out the sun. They entered a narrow door to the airship's passenger compartment and were met by the armored muscles of Chob's bodyguard, Dirk Vikernes. His beard was trimmed in the shape of a snake that emerged from his left sideburn and coiled around his mouth, ending where a normal mustache would stop. He had dazzling blue eyes, and the expression of a man who knew they were dazzling. He wore sculpted yellow plates around his shoulders and chest, the armor flat black the rest of the way down, the company colors. I apologize in advance for this next part because I'm trying desperately to do a masculine Swedish accent, so in an accent that sounded Swedish, he said, "Ah, you are here. I hear the fire at your building is nearly out. I am sure you wish you could be here, helping your people get to safety." He focused on Wu and said, "I will need to collect your weapons, I'm afraid. Blimp rules." Wu looked at Zoey for confirmation. She deferred to Will, who nodded. Wu turned over his katana, several blades, and a bracelet weapon he had mounted to his good wrist. Even then, Zoey was confident he hadn't given up everything. She had her augmentation control necklace, but couldn't see Raiden scars on Vikernes. She figured he knew he could cave in somebody's skull using only what genes and steroids had given him. The weaponry now in his hands, the giant man said, "Thank you. Now you're going to be brushing up against our max weight. Are all three of you under 200 pounds? Zoey said, "Yes." Looking right at her, Dirk said, "Are you sure?" Zoey had to crane her neck to make contact with those icy eyes. "I don't get it. Is this how you flirt? If so, will you consider it a turn-off if I keep stopping to laugh at your beard?" Will, sounding annoyed, said, "You're keeping your boss waiting." "Of course. Everyone's time is important, I'm sure," said Vikernes. He gestured them into the passenger deck. "Life is always shorter than we think." I know it's more German, but give me a break. They were led to a table where Titus Chob was already sitting. He was a small, oily man with dark eyes and graying hair that was shaved on the sides and swept up over top, a style designed to be combed with fingers after rolling out of bed. His outfit was khakis and a denim shirt, looking like he was ready to go out and supervise some landscaping work. His eyes said he was being interrupted from something he'd much rather be doing, and Zoey guessed that he wore that expression 24 hours a day, even when sleeping. Will said, "Titus, I got another meeting at this time. Clients waiting in the bar area, getting more pissed off by the minute. Make it quick." They took that as their cue to sit. Before they could begin, Chob said to Will, "And before we even start, let me make it clear that this meeting fulfills the favor I owe you. Whatever you're about to ask me for, it doesn't start from a place of me owing you a debt. Even that is being generous. The favor was owed to Arthur, not you." He turned to look at Zoey for the first time. "Your father was a great man. Tragic the way it ended for him, but also inevitable. Men like him typically don't die in their sleep." Zoey got the "your father was a great man" stuff a lot, usually as functions with donors trying to get on her good side. Her father had impregnated Zoey's mother, abandoned her, then all but threatened her with death if she pursued paternity. He had made his money by crushing the desperate and vulnerable like grapes in a wine press. Still, Zoey had developed an answer that seemed to satisfy everyone. He was passionate about what he believed in. The whole room jolted. As the airship pulled away from the rooftop, Zoey watched the world sink down from the side windows. Her stomach did a drunken backflip and fell flat on its face. "When he died," said Titus, watching the city drain from their view, "his vision died with him." Will quickly cut off any chance for Zoey to reply to this. "I know your time is valuable, and you know the context for this meeting. I'm actually surprised you're up here talking to me, rather than down there trying to quell the uprising. Getting big enough to make the news now, scaring away tourists, destabilizing our fragile paradise. Every empire is a house of cards, as you well know." "But business must be booming for you," said Will. "Every mom-and-pop shop will want private security at their door." "Only if said security ensures a steady flow of happy customers who are in the mood to spend money. If there is unrest in the streets to the point that everyone is afraid to leave their apartments, then a guy at the door with a yellow jacket and a machine gun isn't going to make a damned bit of difference. When the money dries up, so will security budgets. No, my perfect scenario is a completely peaceful city and a populace who appreciates that only my services can preserve that peace." A completely nude woman with a body like an Olympic swimmer strode up. She was wearing white body paint so that she looked like a Greek statue. Zoey was taken aback. She was familiar with the chef's crew of servers, as they had also been a prominent part of Wolf's streams. The woman placed a platter on the table, and Zoey glanced over at Will to see if he'd ogle at her as she walked back to the kitchen. He did not. Zoey did. A bit. The dish on the platter looked like some kind of chilled bean thing, served on a misty tray of liquid nitrogen. Yep, this was a Chef Wolf dish, all right. Will said, "So we all have the same goal, then. We need to quell this." "How do you intend to do that?" "A two-pronged approach of showing force in the streets and putting those ugly rumors to rest." Chob raised an eyebrow. "You think that'll do it, huh? That's making me think you don't even understand what this is about." "We were there," Zoey interjected. "In the middle of the riot. Bricks hit the van. I'm pretty sure I get it." Chob laughed and looked back at Dick Vikernes, who was looming over her shoulder. "What was it, 90 seconds? The bodyguard chuckled. Chob turned back to Zoey. "I said to him before you got here, I'd never known a woman under 30 who could go more than 2 minutes without talking about herself." To Will, he said, "You didn't give her the standard, let me do all the talking speech on the way here?" Back to Zoey. "I'd explain it, but I doubt you'd be able to stay quiet long enough." Zoey bit her lips so hard she tasted blood. "Give it a try. I'm always eager to learn." Chob carefully rolled some of the bean things on some kind of fancy cracker, sprinkled some kind of orange crumbles on top, then dabbed it with a pulpy red sauce. As he chewed, he said, "A long time ago, a capable, strong man perfected by millions of years of natural selection, emerged from his cave. Zoey thought, oh God, he's one of those guys. Then another strong, capable man, and it was a man, not a woman, walks up and says, "Help me build my hut, and in exchange, I'll help you hunt later." And the man said, "Sure, but I don't trust your caveman brain to remember this favor, so write it down on a note. A piece of paper that proves that I did something great, and that in exchange, someone must do something great for me. Those transferable acts of heroism are what we called money. Each and every dollar represents a bold action from a talented, competent, hard-working man somewhere in the past. When that system is functioning as intended, no one is victimized, no one is cheated. It's just an exchange of glorious acts, men trying to do the most good for others so that they can get the best in return, until the untamed wilderness is transformed into a flourishing paradise." He paused to assemble another bite. "Where that all falls apart," he continued, to Zoey's dismay, "is when bad actors decide they don't feel like doing the hard work of achieving greatness, learning a skill, building something. They would rather just sneak in under the cover of dark and steal someone else's heroism. Or, out of jealousy, demand the government take it and give it to them. Or, when lazy children inherit a stack of heroism from their hardworking father, then demand that they themselves be treated as heroes. Do you know what the name of this restaurant means? Innere Schweinhund?" Inner pig dog. I used to watch Chef Wolf's streams back when this was a restaurant, though it's kind of weird he went with that when Cloud9 was out there. "The inner pig dog is the laziness that haunts a man's soul," said Chob, explaining the thing that Zoey had just told him she already knew. "The voice telling him to quit, to kick back, to have a beer, that nothing is worth doing. It's the part of yourself you have to kill to accomplish greatness. Any man in the world who has built anything or become great at something bears a medal on his chest declaring that he's defeated the Schweinhund, and we bristle when we see anyone who gives in but still gets their share of the spoils." He pointed his spoon at Zoey. "That is why they hate you." "Because I inherited my money?" "Because every man can feel when things are out of balance. We are built to be sickened by injustice." "Oh, and here I thought people were mailing me rape threats because they're psychopaths who get turned on by spreading fear." "Psychopaths persist in the species because women find them attractive, thus breeding more psychopaths." Zoey felt Will shifting in his seat, sensing the annoyance building in him. He had little use for these debates that Zoey was somehow constantly getting sucked into. "Whereas men," she said, "choose their sex partners based purely on moral virtue. Getting back to the original topic, what, in your estimation, would make all of this go away?" "You've seen the video of when the North Korean government fell? The crowds tearing down that statue? That's when the mob will be satisfied." "Only I'm the statue. So what, I should retire, take some money, and go back to Colorado?" "No, I don't think that would do it. I think they need to topple you." "Speaking of Korea," said Will, before Zoey could open her mouth, "you built all of this off of contracts you had over there. When you were with Odin's hammer, all that off-books work behind the border." "You were there?" "I was. I saw the aftermath of your people's work in Kaesong. I understand that they were paid very well, deservedly so. It can't be so easy to shoot a 5-year-old child. They make for such small targets. Well, I guess it's easier when they're starving and barricaded inside a school. And now they're surviving comrades. Instead of starving in the streets, can dine at one of the 4 Chick-fil-A locations that just opened in their city. What's your point?" "My point is, if I were to, say, smash you through that window and feed you to the propellers." Zoey grabbed Will's arm. "Stop. Go. Walk away. Go outside and have a smoke." She glanced back at Wu. "You too. I want to talk to Mr. Chob alone." Will stared daggers at her, but didn't move. She repeated, "Go. There's a little bar through that door, right? Go have a drink." To Wu, "And yes, go with him. Don't make me say it again." They both left, reluctantly. Chob almost imperceptibly nodded to Dirk Vikernes, who stepped away, taking up a position in the corner instead of leaving the room, as Zoey would have preferred. Chob was spooning more beans onto a cracker. Zoey grabbed a cracker and started doing the same. "What is this, some kind of bean salad?" "They're all eggs, a mix of salmon roe, caviar, escamoles. That's ant larvae. The orange crumbles are sugar-cured egg yolks. These are fried blinis. The sauce is a Moroccan harissa." She chewed. The eggs were just frozen enough to kind of gently shatter in the mouth. The sauce was spicy and minty. The varying temperature hit her tongue in waves. It was deeply unsettling, and also she immediately wanted more. Chob nodded in the direction Will had gone and said, You know he agrees with everything I just said, right? Don't let him tell you any different. He knows he should be at the head of the table. I can't even imagine what lies Will is telling you to make you think your interests are aligned. And I'll say this, I think it's cruel the way he's stringing you along, letting you be the public face of the operation for whatever demented purpose he's decided that serves. This summer, when I heard he'd supposedly found you like that and gotten you to a hospital, I said, there it is. That's how he's going to do it once he's decided he's done with her. He set the stage. Soon they'll find you in the tub with your wrists split open, and he'll say, we all knew she was troubled, the poor girl. Even had to be institutionalized at one point. The burden of leadership was just more than that little Zoey could bear. Instead of taking the bait, Zoey swallowed, leveled her gaze at Titus Chaub, and said, they're right. The blowback, I mean. I had Dexter Tilley killed. She watched him very carefully. Anyone can suppress a reaction when the situation calls for it, but it is almost impossible to avoid that initial half-second surprise. It was in that fraction of a moment that Titus Chaub flashed an expression of mild amusement, the look of a man who had heard a statement he knew was a lie and was relishing the power of knowing the truth. And in that moment, Zoey knew that either Chaub had killed Tilley or knew who had done it. It wasn't that strange of a thought. The man's empire was built on gunmen who, in a sane city, would have washed out of a police academy. If he wanted it done, he could have it ordered with a glance and a nod. Still, Chaub's expression recovered faster than most people's, she had to admit. Well, that's good to know. Am I supposed to be scared? The nude server returned and placed in front of each of them a small wooden plank. On each was a piece of meat that was still squirming. It was a flayed eel, its head intact but body sliced open and pinned to the wood, like a dissection in biology class. Zoey suppressed her urge to recoil in disgust, but, just like Chaub, knew she did not do it in time. Chaub said, "This way, you know it's fresh." Zoey tried not to look at it. Still, she could hear it. A slimy exposed wound, writhing in pain. "I don't expect you to be scared of me, no. But if the roof blows off this city, it's not going to look like anything you've seen before. How many private security staff do you have on your payroll?" "Over 1,000, he said, as he carved off a piece of eel. "And growing." "But you don't accept anyone who has implants, and you don't use any other raiding gadgets. No tiny blasters that can melt a whole car." "That's because none of it works. I just heard about a man who's in the hospital, still on fire a week later." "The bootleg implants don't work. They have buggy software by design. That's because there's only one source for the real thing, and I'm not selling. Yet." Chaub stopped chewing. Just for a second, but she caught it. She continued, "This situation in the city will get fixed, and soon. I can't make them love me, but I can make them piss their pants at the sound of my name. I would prefer it not to be that way, but if they don't leave me a choice." She shrugged. "I believe you. After all, you killed Dexter Tilley." He cut off another chunk of the thrashing eel and took a bite. As he chewed, they locked eyes for about 3 seconds. Zoey looked away first. She picked up her knife and sliced the head off of her eel, putting it out of its misery, and stood. "Where's the server? I want to leave her a tip." 13. Zoey joined Will in the cramped little bar area, and they had a drink in silence. The encounter had gone more or less the way they'd planned it. They were passing a giant golden cat on their left, a Chinese casino designed as a 500-foot-tall maneki-neko, like the Lucky Cat figurines with the left paw that waves back and forth in the beckoning motion. The building did in fact have a motorized arm, slowly tilting back and forth to their left as if at any moment it could reach over and slap them out of the air. Zoey felt a twinge of bitterness at the sight of it. This joint was the only reason she wasn't able to design her own headquarters like a giant cat, as it had been seen as a petty knockoff. They finally landed back at the Freya's Palace rooftop, and a few minutes later, they were back in the van, stuck in traffic. Now that she knew about the cancelled subway project, Zoey could silently curse her father every time she crept through Tabula Rasa's constipated surface streets. A few blocks from the hotel, a threat warning briefly popped up on the van's monitor, noting that someone up ahead was concealing an assault rifle under their clothes, but they were alone and did not convey hostile intent from their posture. This kind of thing wasn't uncommon in the city, and the van probably figured one person with one weapon didn't pose much in the way of a threat, considering how many ways the vehicle could instantly ruin any assailant's day. They hit a stoplight, and Zoey said, "Chaub isn't just stirring up the mob. He either did Tilley or knows who did." "Correct. And now he's happy to sit back and see how it plays out." Would he feel the same way if we put a bounty on him? Have Wu board his blimp via jetpack and chuck Chop out of it, screaming? Wu said, "After all these months, I feel like you still don't completely understand what a bodyguard does." "This group, the blowback, would just add that to their list of grievances," said Will. "Chop did this to light a fuse. Killing him doesn't stamp it out." He said it like he'd already considered it as an option. "So, how do we stop a lit fuse?" "That depends on how far you're willing to go." "You can't just kill them all, Will. There are thousands of people in my personal hate group. Tens of thousands." "Well, yes and no. You recall the Goldstone building fire back in the spring? All those deaths because the alarms didn't go off, and the office workers just sat there until it was too late?" "I think so." "The victims smelled smoke. They all wanted to get out, but they didn't hear an alarm. The alarm in that situation wasn't there to announce there was a fire. They knew there was a fire. The alarm was there to give them permission to get up and leave. Nobody wanted to be first. The social pressure kept them glued to their seats. Well, mass violence works the same way. It just takes one person to be the fire alarm, to give everybody permission to go wild. But probably half of the rioters back at the inn couldn't pick you out of a lineup or even explain what they were angry about. It's a core of obsessed true believers surrounded by a cloud of fence-sitters looking for a purpose to cling to. Most of those would disperse if the core were to go away." "But taking them out would just turn them into martyrs, like Tilly." Will thought for a moment. A pause Zoey had come to recognize as Will deciding whether or not to share a piece of potentially upsetting history with her, or, having decided, trying to figure out exactly how to frame it in the best possible light. "There was a fundamentalist Christian group," he began, "who was giving your father trouble. This would have been more than 10 years ago. It was led by a guy who called himself Phineas. And when I say fundamentalists, I'm talking polygamy, child bribes, didn't believe in money or the right to own property because it all belongs to God. The whole thing. Maybe 100 members altogether. So, first they started squatting in one of the under-construction hotels, claiming that a message from the Lord had told them it was their holy site and destined to be a temple. Then they started harassing sex workers and customers at nearby brothels, calling them sinners, filming them and saying they would tell their families back home, yelling to passing tourists about how we were spreading pestilence. One time, one of the girls started yelling back, and some of these guys beat her up pretty badly. You know, to save her soul." Zoey braced herself. Will always played up the badness of Arthur's enemies in stories like this, to make what they did in response go down easier. She sighed and said, "And to deal with them, you did what?" The threat warning briefly popped up on the monitor again. Same guy with a gun, somewhere in the vicinity. Zoey noted that Wu was tapping his screen up front, tracking the guy, just to be safe. Will flicked his eyes over to the monitor before saying, "Now, in PsyOps training, they taught us that social norms exist to keep societies running smoothly over the long term. So, if you have a splinter group with a belief system based on rejecting social norms, a cult, a gang, they're usually destined to self-destruct, because there's a reason society has those rules, right? It's like starting a motorcycle gang that doesn't believe in traffic lights. You're just counting down until the crash happens. That means that within those groups, there are already fractures or contradictions ready to be exploited. Somebody in there is a hypocrite." Well, Bud did a little digging and found that the group's second in command, a guy who called himself Malachi, had lost a daughter a couple years before, when she was just 9. See, the group didn't believe in modern Western medicine. They said all ailments could be cured by prayer or whatever weird purification ceremonies they were doing. It turned out those were ineffective at treating a respiratory infection in a child already suffering from asthma. Malachi and the girl's mother begged the leader, this Phineas, to take her to a doctor. Absolutely not, he says. So they all stand there and watch this girl suffocate, and as a reward for her show of faith, Malachi gets elevated to his current role as Vice Messiah. Okay, just how dark is this story going to get, Will? So, there's a device called a hypersonic projector that can beam an audio signal like a laser. You can aim it at a person in a crowd and only they'll hear it. Do it to a person who is alone, and they'll perceive it as a voice in their head. As it happens, one day, Phineas's favorite wife comes down with a terrible and mysterious illness, something very much treatable in a modern medical setting, but impossible to treat at home. Her condition goes downhill very quickly, so much vomiting that she's becoming dehydrated and has lost consciousness. The entire group is constantly praying for her recovery, and, sure enough, they get an answer. Or rather, one of them does. Phineas, alone in his room, hears a voice as plain as day, telling him to take his wife to a nearby clinic, that the Lord is going to work through the doctors to see her back to health, that this exception is being made due to the important role said wife is going to play in fulfilling the prophecy and the building of the temple. Later that night, without telling anyone else about this divine message he's received, Phineas sneaks her off to the clinic, and they immediately hook her up to an IV. Who was operating the magic voice thing to beam the message into his head? Andre. So, just moments later, Malachi, the second in command, is awoken in his room by a vision of his deceased daughter, floating outside his window. Oh my god! That was, what, a hologram? And a replication of her actual voice, both constructed from what few videos we could find from when she was alive. The spirit directs him to leave the construction site he's squatting in and go down to the sidewalk. There, his daughter's spirit points him toward the clinic, tells him to go to a certain room if he wants to see a false prophet in action, saying the man who sentenced her to a horrible death is now indulging his own wife with the very care the daughter was denied. Malachi bursts into the room with Phineas and his wife. A fight breaks out. Phineas winds up dead via a scalpel to the jugular. The next week, Phineas's inner circle murders Malachi and 5 of his most loyal followers in retaliation. The rest of the group takes sides and either kill each other or flee the city to go find some other movement to get brainwashed into. Problem solved. And what was the wife's name? Asked Zoey. The one who almost died. I don't recall. Something biblical. And she just happened to get sick right when you needed her to, for the plan to work. You didn't make that happen. When did I say that? Wow. I asked you how far you were willing to go. The light had turned green at the intersection, but the pedestrians in the crosswalk kept coming, ignoring the signal. Wu edged the van forward slightly and tapped the horn. In this city, it just made the people walk slower. Zoey said, Well, the good news is Stench Machine got 12 new followers on Blink today. He had a camera attached to his collar. People could watch him stalk the courtyard at the Casa de Zoey. Have you ever watched him try to hunt a bird? It's hilarious. One time, he lunged after one that was already dead and still missed it. The pedestrians had parted, and Wu was finally allowed to pull into the intersection. Then, as he crossed the lanes and reached the opposite crosswalk, a single figure strode out and stopped right in front of the van. The vehicle automatically detected the pedestrian and slammed on its brakes, leaving the van in the middle of the intersection where it would be blocking cross traffic once the light turned. The person standing there, Zoey noted, was the one who had already been highlighted on the threat monitor. The man, a small, muscular guy with a mass of red hair, looked right at them. Zoey had found that Halloween month was fraught with awkward social situations in Tabula Rasa, as it was never clear when exactly someone was or was not in costume. This was a city in which you could stand in line at a taco truck in April and end up behind a guy wearing a cape and a sword and in front of a woman wearing nothing but thin strips of gauze and a flamboyant wig. In late October, complimenting someone on their costume was dangerous business, if in reality they had just come back from the dentist. Zoey was pretty sure, however, that the man standing in front of the car giving them the stink eye was not dressed for Halloween. He had long red braids that made Zoey think of a Viking, which spilled over enormous metal shoulder pads. Below that was a bare torso covered in tribal tattoos. Below that, a codpiece that was flickering with animated flames. Belts of ammunition crossed his torso. Hovering on either side of his head were plastic skulls with blazing red eyes, whizzing softly as tiny propellers held them aloft. The ginger Viking reached behind him, his hand vanishing under an emerald cape, then brought out an exotic-looking machine gun that the van, of course, already had noted. Some of the pedestrians in the crosswalks fled at the sight of it. Some of them. They've made the van, said Will, stating the obvious. Wu tapped an icon on the dash. A booming electronic voice said, You are obstructing the vehicle. If you do not move away immediately, extremely painful countermeasures will be deployed. If you ignore this warning, any further actions will be considered self-defense. The man glanced to his left and right, then smirked. About a dozen pedestrians in the crosswalk fanned out in formation. They weren't armed. They weren't in combat gear. At least 2 of them were boys no older than 13. They just stood there, eyes fixed forward, a human wall blocking the street. The Viking sneered, pulled up the machine gun, and thunderous orange fire erupted from 2 different barrels. A cluster of white pockmarks appeared in the glass in front of Wu. Zoey ducked and screamed, joining a chorus of pedestrians outside doing the same. Wu, however, remained calm. There was a reason the vehicle's security protocols didn't see this as a lethal threat. The bullet marks in the windshield quickly healed themselves. But the dozen people who blocked the road also didn't flinch. The protocol here was to just run the threat right over, but they couldn't do that, or go around him without flattening 3 or 4 non-combatants, including some minors. The man had brought human shields and was no doubt streaming their plight to the world. Zoey turned and saw that there were more human shields behind them, and there was stalled traffic on both sides. They were boxed in, and would remain so until or unless Wu decided to call their bluff. As the Viking reloaded, he yelled, "Confess!" Then one of the hovering plastic skulls opened its plastic jaw, and in a cartoonish skeleton voice repeated, "Confess!" Will said, "Just go, they'll move." Zoey was not so sure of this. Before Wu could act, the Viking reached behind him and pulled something else out from under the cape. He flung the object toward the van. It was a little black disc, like a hockey puck. It hid the windshield and stuck there, attached by 3 prongs. The van's threat software was rapidly scanning the device and immediately flashed "Unknown Object." The 3 prongs in the puck glowed orange, and acrid smoke hit Zoey's nostrils. Liquid glass dripped down from the spot like candle wax. Then the windshield shattered. Molten glass splattered the interior of the van, bits landing in Zoey's hair and on her jacket. She smelled herself burning and suddenly had a vivid flashback to a teenage encounter with an abusive scumbag in an electric stovetop. Wu sat back up in the driver's seat in time to see the Viking aim his gun again, now with no barrier between them. The man, grinning broadly, yelled, "Confess!" The human shield stood fast, but Wu made his decision. His job was to protect Zoey. He punched the automated override on the dash. Then, everything went flying. The world was spinning, crashing. Zoey found herself on the ceiling of the van. They were upside down, junk tumbling all around her. A cup of coffee splashed next to her shoulder, soaking her jacket. Monitors exploded next to her. Bullets impacted, the Viking spraying into the vehicle. The van's female electronic voice said, "Bystanders in proximity, awaiting countermeasures authorization." The rear door opened. It was Will, kicking his way out. Zoey looked back toward the driver's seat and saw Wu roll away from the windshield, away from the gunfire. He pointed, "Follow Will." This seemed like the slightly less bad of 2 horrible options. The van was now in a mobile death trap. Zoey crawled out into the pavement, and the surrounding crowd immediately started alerting the Viking to where she was. "She's going out the back! Hey!" Will took cover behind one of the open van doors. The Viking yelled, "Confess, and this can all be over." The van, as if in reply, said, "Bystanders in proximity, awaiting countermeasures authorization." Zoey said, "Van, you are authorized." Compartments on each side of the vehicle slid open. Out from them poured what looked like a swarm of thousands of insects. They circled above the overturned van for a few seconds, and then dispersed into every direction. They were tiny, pea-sized riot control drones programmed to launch themselves at aggressors, anyone in the crowd who was taking any kind of hostile posture. They would then swarm their faces, pushing into nostrils and ear canals and eyes, emitting a high-pitched shriek that smashed around inside the target's skull. The frequencies were carefully crafted to trigger a primal panic response in the brain, creating the impression that the howling mortal threat was coming from a specific direction, in this case the van. In virtually every human, this would instantly trigger an irresistible urge to run at full sprint in the opposite direction. Zoey stepped out from behind the cover of the van door and watched the crowds flee from her like a puddle from a dropped stone. The buzzing drones swirled around her, brushing strands of Zoey's hair as they whipped past to go overwhelm some stubborn target. She looked to her left. A semi was there, towing a huge stainless steel cylinder. That's what had rolled the van, presumably having been hijacked/stolen by the bad guys who'd been lying in wait at the intersection. The driver of the vehicle was isolated from the drone swarm, the black specks bouncing off his windshield like bees trying to get at him. Zoey looked for the Viking. About 10 feet in front of the overturned van was now a clump of 6 people, their heads together, arms locked, forming a human dome around the Viking who was kneeling in the center, shielding him from the swarm. The barrel of his gun poked out between 2 torsos. All this had been planned and practiced. This infuriated Zoey. Will said, "Zoey, get to cover." Nah. Maybe it was her mom's stupid confidence-building hand cream. Maybe her sanity had finally just snapped. Or maybe she was just getting sick of this shit. Zoey strode through her insect swarm and dug into her jacket pocket for a band to tie her hair back. One of the kids she thought was no older than 13 was standing next to the igloo of human shields, holding his ears, crying, the drones crawling around his face. "Stop!" he cried. "Make them stop!" Zoey stopped near the bullet-riddled front of the van. "Get out of here, all of you. If you get a couple blocks away, they'll leave you alone." The kid didn't move. No one did. These people were nuts. "Please," cried the kid. "Make them stop, please." Camera drones above. Bystanders with their own cameras on all sides. These people were creating a propaganda clip they could snip out of context and use against her forever. Zoey said, Van, turn off the countermeasures. Drones, go back home, to the van or whatever. It was never totally clear to Zoey what voice commands would or wouldn't be understood, but the swarm of tiny drones swirled their way back to her, landing on the pavement around her feet. They actually set themselves on the ground in formation, in perfect rows, ready to take off again if asked. To the Viking, she said, I know this is probably too complicated for you to grasp, but if you kill me, you don't get the money. You need a confession. If you just wiggle my dead jaw and try to imitate my voice on camera, they're probably going to notice. The people forming the human igloo around the Viking stepped away from him. He stood there, working a lever on his machine gun, looking smug. And I am not leaving here without that confession, he shouted back. He didn't need a shout for Zoey's benefit. They were at a casual conversation distance now. This was all for the benefit of the witnesses. Zoey put her hands on her hips. Dude, the vehicle behind me has a dozen other countermeasures I can order, including one that will turn your body into a Roman candle. But I prefer to talk it out, so to you, to everybody watching the streams, I'm telling you that we didn't kill that guy. The Viking smirked. We have witnesses, cow. Anonymous staff from Salt Lake Wellness. That was the upscale mental health facility Zoey had done her time in over the summer. We have copies of the report from the doctor. Your admission was not due to a nervous breakdown, but from a neurological side effect from eating human flesh. What? Holy crap, you people have made up a whole mythology here. Look, your left hand is trembling, another side effect of the disease. I just crawled out of a car wreck. I have burns. We have anonymous experts who say you would have had to have eaten over 100 human livers to show these kinds of symptoms. More if they were the livers of children, which we all know is your preference. Will you listen to yourself? You just keep adding things. You know, it's almost a compliment to how clean of an operation I run now. They've had to make up something that sounds like it came from a B-horror screenwriter just before his heart exploded from a coke overdose. Stay back, Blackwater, shouted the Viking. Will had circled around to the other side of the van. He was carrying something. The Viking aimed his gun at him and barked, Drop whatever that is! It was a black object the size of a lantern. Will set it at his feet. The bystanders had been pushed back about 100 feet, but were creeping in again, curiosity drawing them like sharks to a shipwreck. The passengers in the stopped vehicle had gotten out to speculate. This included the Viking's accomplice who'd been driving the semi. He was now standing by the vehicle holding a black club, one of the shock sticks you could see all over the city these days. They could stun you, or turn your chest cavity into a smoking hole, depending on where the wielder had set the dial. The guy was close enough that he could be on top of Zoey in about 3 steps. The Viking shifted his aim slightly and said, You too, stop right there. This time he was talking to Wu, who had shambled up from behind Will, like a zombie. In addition to the arm that was already in a cast, he was now also bleeding badly from his scalp and dragging one leg behind him as if he couldn't bend the knee. Zoey said, Well, it looks like we're at an impasse. I'm not declaring myself to be a man-eating liver addict just because you're pointing a gun at me. If we start allowing truth and lies to be decided that way, society will, keep being exactly like it is. If you don't confess here, we'll take you to a place where you'll have more time and incentive to reconsider. Enoch, stun the cow and bind her hands. The guy from the semi approached, and a crackle of blue sparks flickered from the end of his baton. He took 2 steps forward. In a blur, Wu flew toward the man, chopped his throat, punched him in the balls, grabbed the baton, smashed it, and twirled the guy around so that Wu was now using him as a human shield. It took about 4 seconds from beginning to end. The Viking said, Let him go! You think his life is worth $1 million to me? The guy said, Hey! To the Viking, Will said, You're new in town, aren't you? What? You're new in town. Maybe you came here for this particular bounty? Shut up! To Wu, You've got 5 seconds to let him go. I can tell, because you're using a firearm. The device at my feet is a propellant cooker. They're well known around here. When activated, it will send out a pulse that will detonate every live cartridge in the vicinity, including your spare magazines and the ammo belts you have draped over your torso for decoration, assuming they're real. Please, take a moment to visualize it. Shut up! Zoey said, It's an objectively stupid invention, but we didn't design it, so don't blame us. The last time somebody set one off in public, the hospitals had to treat over 300 accidental bullet wounds. We are, after all, in America, and also Utah. There's also the fact that all those bullets would be firing wildly just feet away from the tanker truck over there. I don't think any of us, including the bystanders and the people working in these buildings, want that thing going up. Will said, And as of now, the device is armed for sound activation. You pull that trigger, Soon the news will be recapping a spectacular tragedy over a montage of our last known photos. It looked to Zoey like the Viking was, in fact, considering it. His accomplice, still standing upright with Woo's arm around his neck from behind, said, "They're telling the truth, man. I tried to tell you. That's why I brought the Thor Club instead." Will said, "Woo, let him go. Get in the semi." To the Viking, he said, "Since I assume you stole this, I also assume you won't mind if we take it home." Woo tossed the Viking's partner aside and pulled himself into the tanker truck. Zoey thought it was odd they were going to escape in the most flammable mobile object in the city, but maybe that was Will's plan, or sort of mutually assured destruction. Will looked towards Zoey and nodded to the truck. She took the long way around the back of the wrecked van to avoid the Viking's partner and climbed into the cab of the semi next to Woo. The cab smelled like old sweat and cigarettes. Will picked up the cooker device and followed, squeezing in next to Zoey. The Viking made no move to stop them. Will said, "Go." Woo had to back up, then turn slightly to scoot the toppled van out of the way. The lane ahead was clear of traffic, since by now they'd been blocking everything behind them for several minutes, and this time the human shields let them pass. Zoey nervously studied the monitor on the dash that displayed their surroundings, watching the Viking shrink into the distance. They got a block away. 2. The truck was as fast as a very stubborn mule that had died and was now being carried up a hill by a swarm of ants. Will said, "I messaged Carlton to dispatch the sedan, with drone cover. We're creating a secure vehicle switch location at..." Woo said, "What is that?" In the sky ahead was what looked like a giant white bird, diving directly toward them. "Is it a plane?" They didn't need any special sensors to find out. A monitor on the semi's dash was already tuned into blink coverage of the event, currently trending as "Ash Armored Van Wrecked by Red Gun, #CowFession." The star of the feed at the moment was a man in a flying apparatus with gleaming white fold-out wings and twin jets of blue fire pulsing from the back, swooping down from the sky. Zoey's rumbling tanker truck ahead. According to the feed, this guy was named the Human Tank, which was presumably a name he'd picked before he'd bought the wings. Zoey breathed. What do we do? What do we do?" Will said, "Keep driving, and pray that he's not carrying an explosive to do a suicide run." Woo stepped on the accelerator. They rolled along, passing sidewalks full of bystanders who now had turned their eyes skyward, anticipating the conflict, as usual grossly underestimating what constituted a safe distance. Will turned his attention back to the rearview monitor and said, "He's following us." On the screen, the Viking, who according to the feed was named Red Gun, had commandeered a motorcycle and was gaining on them fast. From the front, the Human Tank drew lower and closer. He tilted his wings back to decelerate, and the blue jet shifted as he began his descent, apparently intending to land right in front of the semi. The wings, which weren't only white but were glowing, as if to appear angelic, were as wide as the entire street. The pilot was draped in white cloth and gold belts, topped by a platinum wig. Was this his Halloween costume? His superhero branding? His everyday dress? Zoey had only a few seconds to speculate before he quickly descended to the street in front of them. Too quickly. As far as Zoey could tell, the flying apparatus was supposed to have used its thrusters to gently lower its pilot to a spot just above the pavement, but if so, the mechanism failed, as bootleg radon technology frequently did. As such, the Human Tank landed hard in front of them, and Zoey was sure she could hear both the man's legs break with an audible snap when they hit the pavement. He collapsed, screaming. A glowing golden sword he'd been carrying clattered to the pavement. To be fair to Woo, he did try to stop, but the most advanced brakes in the world still have to adhere to the laws of physics, and they were currently towing several tons of liquid cargo. Woo braked and cranked the wheel, the tanker behind them jackknifing around behind them. None of it was enough to save the Human Tank. Their wheels ran right over the guy and his stupid wings, all of it crunching and tangling under them. Both front tires popped. Woo stayed on the accelerator, but they were now dragging the equivalent of a light aircraft across the pavement beneath them, rolling up a mangled corpse in the wreckage. The semi skidded to a stop, the gleaming cylinder skidding around and banging into a utility pole on the sidewalk. Zoey expected an explosion. None came. She let out a breath. Will said, "Get out!" The moment Zoey opened the door, she heard more tires squealing. The Viking Red Gun had apparently been going full speed on his motorcycle when the tanker truck had stopped abruptly in front of him, the trailer now angled to block the road entirely. The guy tried to brake, then the wheels wobbled under him until the bike tumbled over and skidded away, the man himself rolling to a stop under the trailer. Zoey jumped up out of the cab. There were a few seconds of peace, during which she still expected the tanker to randomly choose that moment to explode and engulf all that she surveyed. Then she glanced to her right and saw the tanker had come to a stop right in front of a sign that said, Budding Minds Daycare. Red Gun was still lying under the tanker, moaning. Zoey yelled to him, You're going to feel incredibly dumb once you realize I'm not guilty of anything. Stay there and we'll get you an ambulance. You lost this one. Once again, Zoey had stumbled across the exact wrong thing to say. Red growled, rolled over, and looked around for his gun. He found it. From a prone position under the tanker, he aimed at Zoey. And then, many things happened at once. She screamed for him to stop. Red squeezed the trigger. Zoey saw an orange flash. She felt a puff of air caress her temple. Then, the cooker activated from inside the cab of the truck. There was a blue flash and a fleeting wave of static in the air that made the hair on Zoey's arm stand on end. And then, fireworks. A rattle of explosions, little bursts of flame up and down Red's body, bullets from his draped belts firing and puncturing him from every angle. Above him, sparks erupted as one shot after the other impacted the tanker truck. Zoey was being tackled, Wu throwing her to the ground and getting on top of her, rolling to get his body between her and the dozens of detonating cartridges Red Gun had strapped to his person. Screams and chaos from all around. Zoey wanted up, to run, to get away from the fireball she knew was coming. She could see the daycare from the ground, saw little curious faces pressed to the window and a frantic elderly woman screaming at them to get away. The last bullet went off. There was silence. Then, trickling liquid. Zoey risked a look over. The tanker was leaking from a dozen holes, drenching the corpse of Red Gun, pooling around the wrecked motorcycle nearby. A pale, milky liquid, swirling and mixing with the blood on the pavement. Wu let Zoey up, and she took a cautious step forward, noting the logo on the side of the tanker. It was a dancing cartoon cow over the words, Real milk from real cows. Will walked up, and the three of them stared at it. Finally, Zoey said, Oh, right, they were playing off the whole cow thing. That makes sense. A fast-talking man was approaching from behind. Zoey thought she recognized the voice. She turned to see Charlie Chopra and his entourage, his eyes wild, a big smile on his face, Cammy the camera drone hovering in front of him. Incredible turn of events, my lovely disciples, and I want to reiterate, if someone tries to sell you a personal flying apparatus, it's not the flying part that's hard, it's the landing. Gravity is what keeps our children and pets from flying off into space, but it is a jealous, jealous mistress. Will walked calmly over to a stopped Mercedes being driven by a middle-aged man who looked like a stockbroker. Will opened the door and stared wordlessly at the driver for 5 seconds. The driver, also never saying a word, exited the vehicle. Will got behind the wheel and said to him, Buy any model you want. Send us the bill. Wu was talking to Zoey, urging her toward the car. Her head felt like it was full of bees. There were faces everywhere, bystanders, people recording, pointing, muttering. Charlie Chopper moved toward her, smiling over his braided beard, clearly hoping to get a comment from her. He was saying something. She wasn't able to process the sounds. He stopped talking and seemed to be waiting for a response. Zoey stared at him, then felt something in her jacket pocket, the plastic tube. She pulled it out and said, Hey everybody, buy this daisy-flavored skin cream. Thanks. She then vomited tiny eggs onto the pavement. 14. Drones tracked the borrowed Mercedes back to their neighborhood, but no one was making an effort to stop them. Zoey told herself not to watch the feeds about the incident on the way back, that she could get more actually useful information in other ways. She made it less than 5 minutes before pulling out her phone. From the back seat, she watched the stream of live camera feeds, blinking from one to the next as the software detected new developments, mostly about crews rushing to the aftermath. The chat streams flowed alongside the feed, and a single message was getting reposted thousands of times. Tomorrow night, we storm the walls. They made it back to the estate and pulled into the underground garage. Echo and Andre were standing there waiting next to Andre's Bentley, rushing to greet them as they exited the car. Andre said, We watched the whole thing, so now they have to throw out all that milk, right? Got bullets in it. He had all these people, muttered Zoey. These regular people, just acting like human shields, ready to die, just to screw me. Kids, some of them, just kids. She was shaking all over, cold. Wu was behind her, now clutching a towel to his bleeding scalp with a hand that wasn't in a cast. Wu, go to the hospital again. It is fine. Cuts to the scalp always look worse than they are. The leg hurts, but I have full range of movement and an elaborate collection of painkillers in my room. Echo said, the city's unrest index is at a 6.5. Zoey said, the what? It's the index that measures the city's unrest, elaborated Andre. Same system that predicted the riot, said Echo. You go over 7, and you get multiple riots across the city in specific hotspots. An 8 is general chaos that shuts down entire neighborhoods. A 10 means all social norms are gone and your city is no longer a city. Zoey tried to keep it together. But why? Who was Tilly to them? Was he like their president? Will shook his head. It's not about him. These things take on a life of their own. It's a self-sustaining reaction. Echo said, and they can always find fuel to keep it going. This morning, a homeless man was found dead around the encampment in the park. Natural causes. He was 60 years old and sleeping outdoors. But the city has the stray dogs problem. She apparently grew alarmed at Zoey's appearance and stopped herself. Hey, are you okay? Yes. Great. Zoey didn't feel like she had complete control over any part of her body at the moment. Anyway, said Andre, picking up the story, corpse lays out long enough, dogs will get at it, chew off parts. Well, somehow, through the grapevine, by noon, the chunks bitten off by canines became all organs missing, and lifelong homeless dude became a valued member of the blowback community. I guess he got kicked out of a Livingston Foundation shelter last month, and why would we kick out a homeless person? Been a member of the staff. Anyway, that was enough of a connection for the conspiracy crowd. Counting the 2 dead from the situation you just came from, the narrative is that you're on a rampage, just eating enemies left and right. Zoey had a sudden, vivid memory of a bullet brushing past her right ear, and found her legs would not support her any longer. She decided to sit down on the concrete floor, and then lie down. It was nice down there. Cool. She curled up. She could not stop shivering. She vaguely sensed everyone around her going nuts, running to her. She felt Echo's hand on her arm. Even with her eyes squeezed closed, she knew it was her. I'm okay. I just need a minute. Just continue the meeting. I'll listen from down here. Will, amazingly, did just that. All right. The good news is we're much better informed now than when we left this morning. We know everything we need to know aside from the exact manner of Tilly's death, and that was always irrelevant. We need to map the anatomy of this group and find where it's weak. A pair of cowboy boots approached. Bud had arrived. From the floor, Zoey said, Hey, Bud. Echo said, She's in shock. Andre said, What's the thing they're all saying in the chat? About storming the walls? They think they're coming here? Zoey decided she was done with this meeting. She got up and shuffled away, muttering something about needing the bathroom, saying not to follow her, that she'd be right back. 15. Zoey took the elevator up to the library, emerged from a hidden door behind a sliding bookshelf, and made her way to her room. She stumbled into the bathroom, splashed water on her face, and concentrated on her breathing. She stared into the vanity mirror. There was something hard and lumpy in her hair, a splatter of molten glass or plastic that had landed there and solidified. She cut it out with scissors. Her jacket and both shirts had burn holes around the shoulder. She took them off and tossed the shirts in the trash. This revealed pink burns on her shoulder and arm, overlapping with the rainbow-shaped scar on her back left by that stovetop all those years ago. There was a chair in front of her vanity. Before she knew what she was doing, Zoey picked it up and swung it at the mirror, shattering it. The stench machine went sprinting away. She hadn't even known he was in the room. She found him crouched in a corner, his hackles raised. She got down on the floor with him, put him in her lap, apologized. Wu knocked on her door. Zoey knew his knock, and she yelled that she was fine. A couple of minutes later, this was followed by a different knock, her mother's. Come in. Zoey's mother rushed in, got down on the floor with her, put her arm around her. Oh, honey, oh my God, Z. I'm fine, I'm fine. Talk to me, Z. It's nothing. It's everything. Things are bad, Mom, in the city. Those people who hate me. Your trolls? It's not just that. Not anymore. It's all turning toxic. It's in the air. People are dying because of me. Because they hate me that much. Everyone. They all hate me. I can't fit it in my head. All that hate. Honey, look at you. This place, these people. This is making you miserable. How loud does the universe have to scream a message at you before you hear it? Let's get out of here, you and me. Let's just go. I don't completely disagree with you. You never once in all of your years said you wanted something like this. The money, I mean. The business. And I was there for every one of your phases. When you were 8 years old and said you wanted to be the first girl to play in the NBA, I bought you that basketball goal, the one the neighbor boys broke. Later on, you wanted to be a pilot, then a stand-up comedian. In your time with Caleb, all I heard about was how you wanted a family. You wanted to be a cool mom, one who travels, takes her kids all over the world. That's your real life. This, all the money and endless meetings with these lizards, these reptiles in suits, it isn't real. Whatever I do, I have to clean up this mess first. Otherwise, I'm no better than Arthur, running away. Who told you that? Will? I swear, sometimes it seems like that guy has had this hold over us, like he's a cult leader or something. Honey, this isn't our mess. And I'm telling you, when this fiasco is over, there'll be another one right behind it. Say the word, and we'll go find Will and tell him off together. What do you think? Zoey didn't answer. She kissed Stench Machine on the head. He hated it. Her mom said, "Can I run you a bath?" No. The bath would actually run itself just with a verbal command from where they were sitting, but still, it was a nice gesture. This is a mood that not even that tub can fix. Zoey stood, setting Stench Machine aside. "Can you do something for me? Go find Will and just tell him I need some time. I have to think." Zoey actually didn't care in the least if Will got this message or not. She wanted to be alone, to give her mother an errand to run. "Can you do that?" "Of course." Her mother left, and Zoey started to leave after her, then remembered she was still in her bra. She grabbed a t-shirt bearing the logo of a band called Monkey Sheriff, and was still pulling it down as she stormed toward the door, almost knocking Wu over. He'd been in there the whole time, apparently having followed her mother inside. Down the hall, down the stairs, down the west wing hallway. She kept walking until it ended in the ballroom. She went straight for the tarp covering the giant, humming, school bus-sized machine. She peeled it back. The machine was black, segmented into rings in a way that made Zoey think of an alien robot caterpillar. She guessed it didn't have to be an alien robot, but it definitely looked weird. They referred to it as Santa's workshop because it spat out toys. It was the Raiden device fabricator that they believed/hoped was the only one capable of making real, reliable gear. Right now, it was hard at work on something harmless, Zoey's Halloween costume, finished parts of which were leaning against the wall nearby. Zoey took Halloween seriously, and she'd been telling the truth when she told Alonzo her costume wouldn't fit through the door. But at any moment, she could load up a new task, and out the end would fall something small enough to hold into your hand, or that could be implanted inside your hand with enough power to tear a car in half or turn a crowd of enemies into a scattered field of black, smoking bones. The gadgetry that came out of the machine was intended to transform a human into a conduit of terror, to destroy and kill in spectacular ways. All of it had been designed by a madman who was now dead, and investing in it had cost her father his life. If what Will said was true, if all this chaos was coming from a few ringleaders who themselves were following the prompt of Titus Chaub, she could use this machine to unleash hell upon them. All of them. Put out a call for a group of the most sadistic bastards in the city, give them the powers of demigods, and turn them loose on her tormentors. Become the monster they claimed she was. Zoey turned on Santa's monitor and flicked through the menus looking for schematics. What she was seeing was incomprehensible to her. She'd need Echo's help to accomplish anything. She tapped some buttons at random, and at one point it made a scary beeping noise, so she quickly exited out of the menu before the machine could explode or melt down or whatever. Then she recalled something her mother had said, and went through a small door into the courtyard. Shoved between some bushes was the rolling basketball goal she'd forgotten she'd bought in early September. Her therapist had recommended it, said repetitive tasks were good stress relief. Well, her city was burning down and enemies were coming to storm her home and rip her to pieces, so this would be a good time for that. She dragged the goal out to a mostly open section of grass, about 10 feet away from a sidewalk that would be her free throw line. A folding banquet table was somewhat in the way, stacked with Halloween party supplies. The stuff was piled all over the courtyard. She grabbed the lip of the table and flipped it over, sending everything crashing to the ground. It took some time to find the ball under some shrubs nearby. It was a little underinflated. She had to slam it to make it bounce off the sidewalk. It would do. She shot. The ball bumped the front of the rim, then the backboard, then rolled in. That was a miss. Anything that hit the rim was counted as a miss. Anything that banked in was counted as a miss. That was bad form. The fact that it fell through was irrelevant. Process was all that mattered. Her high school coach had drilled that into them. Master the process, and the outcome eventually works out. She had become a starter her sophomore year, after 4 other girls had gotten suspended for drugs. That was on the varsity team, too. Granted, they were too small of a school to have a JV team, but still, she was good. Had been even better back in middle school before she started smoking, before the hormones went to work on her body. She loved the contact, setting a screen that knocked another girl in her ass, running through sweaty elbows to get to the rim, standing in among 3 girls taller than her and boxing out, tipping the rebound to herself, talking trash. Nobody came to the games. It didn't matter. She shot. The ball bounced off the front of the rim, came right back to her. She shot again, knew it was a bad one before it fully left her fingertips, watched it clang off the right side of the rim and go flying. She went to go chase down her own rebound, but Andre caught it and bounced it back to her. He had been standing out there the whole time, waiting for her. She shot. Nothing but net. She said, "You're like Bud, following from in front. So, do you people take a vote every time to see who has to come talk me down?" Somebody usually volunteers. Last time it was Echo, when I got mad about the air conditioner. That's because you specifically said that if any of us came after you, you'd stab us. Had a kitchen knife in your hand. She was the only one who thought you wouldn't follow through. Ah, the infamous air conditioner tantrum. Growing up, air conditioning was an expensive luxury reserved for days when it was so hot that a normal life was not possible. Summer nights were about fans, an open window, and partial nudity. The sticky clamminess acting as your alarm clock. When she moved in with Caleb for those couple of years, his rental house in Lafayette had central air, and Zoey freaked out any time it was turned on before July or after August. She always imagined money flying out of the window. The Casa de Zoey, on the other hand, ran off of a geothermal system and solar panels. She had no power bill, according to Will, so she got to where she was okay with leaving the air on, but it made a weird noise, an almost imperceptible whine that gave her a headache. She mentioned it one day and somebody guessed it was some squeaky bearings or some other tiny flaw deep in the system. Crews were there the next day, and the day after. When they left, the noise was gone. Then, by sheer chance, Zoe happened to see the invoice for the HVAC repair, $26,423. Enough to feed a family 4 months. Enough to get a homeless person off the streets for a year. Money she'd burned to solve a minor annoyance. She had thrown a fit, made a fool of herself, demanded they undo the repairs, which of course was dumb. They just charged that much again to put the broken parts back on. Demanded she be consulted on every expense in the future, also dumb unless she wanted to start scheduling panic attacks every hour. Then she had stormed out of the room, and Echo eventually came after her and brought her a cupcake, which was incredibly demeaning and also worked. Zoe shot. Again, nothing but net. She said, "Want to play a game of horse?" "Nah, don't think your back could support my weight." She gathered the ball and just held it this time. They know we didn't kill Tilly, or do any of the other stuff. They have to know, deep down. The whole thing about us being cannibals or whatever, they don't even believe it. They're not even trying all that hard to make the story consistent. "There are things people actually believe," said Andre, "and things they only pretend to believe because it's convenient. But over time, it don't matter which is which. It's all just blurs together. People are like that." Okay, so why would they choose to believe this particular awful thing? "Because they hate you, Zoe. And because they hate you, they need to come up with a reason to hate you. See, because otherwise, they're just bad people." "What? Why did they hate me in the first place?" "When you played ball, were you best buddies with all the other girls on the team? Did y'all hang out together in the off-season?" "No." "But when you were together on the court, when you won, you felt something. Maybe any other time you wouldn't carry on a conversation with any of them without wanting to blow your brains out. But on the court, you suddenly had a bond. All them differences fell away. That's why we have sports. The game is just a pretext to let you go out there and feel that." "So, it's just a game to them. Is that it?" "Well, that feeling. You get that in a war zone too, only 100 times stronger. So call it a game or a war or whatever. Ultimately, it's just about that bond. So yeah, the thing they hate isn't even about you. It's a fictional version of you they've crafted to be as hateable as possible. The more they hate you, the more they love each other. So they turned me into a cow monster. You understand the origin of the cow thing, right? They're not calling you fat. Well, they're not just calling you fat. Among these groups, cow is a slang for harassment target. Your reactions are entertainment to them. They milk you for your tears, for pain. But they're humans, so at some point they'll feel guilt over it. That's when they need to manufacture some reason to justify it. A shared fiction that lets the game continue. Okay, so how long can that go on? At some point, that hate has to dry up. I mean, it's been months. There was no answer, and she could tell Andre was straining not to say something. She threw out her hands. What? I want you to replay what you just said, and think about who you just said it to. Okay, I get it. Racism has been going on for millions of years. I got a whole speech about that this morning from the heart-eating guy. Yep, sounds like Alonzo. I'm sick of being lectured to. I've done nothing but try to go legit since I got here. I'm surrounded by corporate sharks, people who got their power specifically so they could abuse it. And because I'm out here not doing that, because I'm actually trying to be a good person, they all see it as weakness. Andre again suppressed a response. You obviously want to say something. He hesitated. Zoey, you don't deserve the hate you're getting. Not you, not anybody. But, you've never abused your power. Never ever. No, not on purpose. You never pressured a subordinate into having sex with you. What? Are you talking about Armando? He was into it. All I did was suggest we go swimming because we were hot and we didn't have bathing suits. He initiated almost everything after that, as fast as he could. Never put a gun to his head. He was a subordinate, somebody you employed who took orders from you. Same as with that personal trainer. Now, the personal trainer, that was absolutely his idea. I don't even think he was a real trainer. Will found him, and I swear to God, he knew what he was doing. I think that was Will trying to relieve my anxiety. It actually wasn't the worst thing she tried, but this conversation was not the place to mention it. She bounced the ball, shot, missed. There's power in how other people see you, said Andre, and I don't think you get how scary you are to people now. In those parties you go to with all them captains of industry, you can think of it like a spider web, all these crisscrossing vectors of power. This one is afraid of that one, who answers to this other guy over here. Sure, nobody's putting an actual gun to anybody's head, but it's because they don't have to. It's just understood. If you don't want to become a monster, if you don't want to become like Chob or even Yo Daddy, you've got to start paying attention to that stuff. Otherwise you'll become one of them and you won't even notice the change. If all that's true, if I'm so powerful, why do I feel like nothing I do matters? I march right into Alonzo's lair. I march right into Chob's stupid blimp of evil. I march straight up to a brainwashed hate mob with a gun in my face. And for what? My mom was right. Behind every monster, there's just another monster forever. If I'm so scary to everyone, then why can't I actually change anything? It's frustrating, isn't it? Makes you want to lash out. Find one tangible bad guy and just unleash all that rage on him. Sure does. Go over to the workshop. Tell it to make me a big death ray that will fry everybody. Andre said nothing. Zoey faced him. What? He still said nothing. Oh, you're saying that that's why this group decided to hate me. They feel powerless. I knew you'd get there. Why do you think they're targeting you, and not any of the giant multinational corporations who screw them out on a daily basis, or somebody like Chob? It's because they think they can get to you, that they'll see some kind of victory, feel strong again. That's why half the time they talk like you're an all-powerful, all-knowing mastermind, and half the time act like you're Trailer Park Barbie. To serve their purposes, they need you to be both. They said they're storming the walls tomorrow night. You think they're coming here? Doesn't it sound like it? But if they show up here and we defend ourselves, then I'm the bad guy. I can't win. Well, I'm just going to sit here and wait. Will said in any situation like this, it all comes down to a core of ringleaders. These people want to make me think they're infinite and anonymous, an unstoppable swarm. But they're just people, a specific number of flesh and blood human beings. I want to find out who they are. Will's already got Bud on that. Andre picked up the ball. He spun it around in his hands, assumed a shooting posture, eyeballed the rim. He shot. The ball missed so badly that it hit off the top of the backboard, bouncing up and back, flying into a second-floor balcony where it shattered a potted plant. Andre squinted at it and said, You sure that hoop's regulation? I want to talk to these guys, said Zoey. Face to face. We have to give sanity one more chance. And if that don't work? She didn't answer.